We're Earth Force. We are a national nonprofit and the home of environmental action civics. In field chats, you'll hear research-based, actionable tips and inspiring stories of youth-adult partnerships that empower young people to become environmental decision makers. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to episode 46 of Field Chats Environmental Action Civics Essentials, brought to you by Earth Force. In this episode, we're sharing an excerpt from our Community of Practice gathering, where we dive into step 1 of the Earth Force process, talking all about conducting community inventories. You'll hear ideas, examples, and reflections on helping students explore their communities with curiosity and purpose. Enjoy.
And so today we're really gathered to talk about step 1 and really what it is in the Earth Force process. It's that first step in a different way of learning, and we're the young people we work with, and we see them as investigators and problem solvers and decision makers in their own communities. And through this step of defining your community one, and then also conducting inventories. And really that's what we're going to be talking about today is inventories, which you can do by mapping, asking questions, and noticing what's around you or noticing what's around those students so that they begin to develop those habits of civic leadership. And so when we guide students through inventories, we're really helping them shift education towards a model where civic skills and community partnership are really at the center, or just as central as content knowledge. And so this is honestly the foundation of EAC, which is empowering those young folks to lead change while affirming educators' role as trusted guides and experts. So it's like this co-facilitation. So really that step 1 is kind of that information gathering, working together to observe and gather information that you can therefore make decisions with. So without further ado, we're going to kind of start to dive into getting started with inventories. And I'm going to hand it over to Kristen to get us started.
Yes. So community inventories or community investigation, that's step 1 of the Earth Force process. Taylor teed us up pretty well. But to give us just like a one sentence overview, in step 1, you're investigating your community with students to get an idea of the strengths and challenges and assets in your community, and it's really all about information gathering. There's a lot of ways to do this. We're going to give you some examples. My favorite way of doing an inventory is through maps. I think maps are an awesome merge of visual data, of written data, and place-based data, especially if that's something that you're working with. So, and it doesn't have to be a super complicated map either. This map here is just a screenshot of plain old Google Maps. And this is Berlin, Maryland. It's a little town on the Eastern Shore that I visited recently for a partner. And so on Google Maps, there are all sorts of things that you can search for and filter for and kind of keep an eye open for. You can see traffic on Google Maps, you can see green spaces, you can see different types of establishments. And the one that I picked to zoom in on was grocery stores. And so the question here might be, what does food access look like in our community? Where's a good place to get food if we're hungry? Where can we go? And then from there, you might get some other kind of cascading questions and really drive through that inquiry with your students. So you might be able to take a look at, where are places to get food in our community? Well, what else does that tell us? So on this map, for example, in Berlin, we can get a snack at Dollar General. We could go to the Pit Stop Beer and Wine. There's a gas station up here. And there's only one grocery store, which is Food Lion. And for some folks, that might be a drive, that could be a bike ride if they have a car, if they have a bicycle. And again, these are some of those cascading driving inquiry questions around how easy is it to access food in our community. So with a map like this, and you could, guide through those questions with your students, what other questions could you ask about this? And later on, what sorts of issues could you pull from this information and these observations? Taylor's also going to show us a super cool map later on that has a different issue lens on it. But for now, it's really about just investigation without even getting to the issue at all first. I'll pass it on to SJ and Taylor to talk about other forms of community inventories that we could do. Go ahead, SJ.
So hi everyone. My name is SJ and I'm one of the program managers at Earth Force. I am going to share some examples, which is, one of the reasons why you came here, in terms of how to get started. Step 1 on the Earth Force process, right? And so oftentimes we do think about maps like right away, and especially I've been doing a lot of work in geography. I mean, environmental action civics and facilitating environmental action in like with the intersection of geography is really brilliant. But I also want to, I'm going to be sharing some examples of some qualitative inventories. Um, Most of the time when I'm working with young people and educators, they go right to thinking about science, and science is hard data. That's like what our brains are trained to think about. But I also want us to think about what are some other ways to collect data that is also science, right? And so we can think about photo inventories, we can think about interviews, we can think about surveys, we can think about asset mapping. And so one of the things I've been working on in some curriculum integration with DC is around urban heat islands. So you can also kind of start with a topic or lens already, and dive more into how does that issue, show up in your community. So you're still at the point of step one, gathering information, but it's not just like on everything. It's a little bit more narrowed. So with urban heat islands, some of the things that I was having young people do is think about a couple of things. So one, do like an asset mapping walkabout, which just means that you're centering the strengths first. So young people be walking around their neighborhood, looking at where there's mature trees. Perhaps those are near the library. Maybe there's one near the bus shelter. Maybe the library itself is an informal cooling center. And so they're thinking about all of these strengths and assets in their community while walking around, while getting outside, that are assets, right? That are strengths around keeping things cool. And so, and you might also start thinking about the people involved, right? If there's a school custodian, or maybe there's a park contact when you're going around the community, so you're also be thinking about people and places as assets. Another idea is we talked about fields or interviews. So thinking about interviewing people who are in the community who are most impacted by this issue. So something young people could do in this example, for example, at the bus stop or the corner store or the library, they could be asking, where do you feel heat the most? What helps you cope? And it could just be those two questions, right? And so they might say, oh, the kids wait inside for the AC, but there's only one bench in the library, right? And so they're gathering data in this qualitative interview style way. And they're gathering assets and concerns as well. Another idea, this one, someone had suggested for another, students had done this for another sort of topic, but I like the idea of whether it's the school news or something else, having like a sort of postcard, or whether it's a booth or just like a larger informational gathering, where you're collecting a larger pool of data or mini stories. For example, you could do like a heat stories postcard, and you, as young people, you could be at a booth and collecting stories, just thinking about gathering multiple voices, diverse voices, and thinking about centering those most impacted by the potential issue that you're going to take action on.
I did want to share this National Risk Index map, which has a few different factors into it, as well as like community-based framing. So this current map is broken into county, so you can kind of see across the 48, the contiguous, it's kind of, this is by county, but then you can switch it to census tract, and that really switches up the perspective of it. You can see some differences and some observations. And then it kind of really can continue to narrow down. We're going to take a peek over here at the Chesapeake Bay, at some of these areas, and how this particular tool works is you click on a census tract or a county, and it can generate a report around risk index. And you can see down here how that risk is calculated. So I don't know if there's some quantitative, sorry, I get those mixed up, quantitative elements, where that data comes from, the interpretation of that data, and how that quantitative data can actually also be qualitative in nature and continue to generate more inquiry around a certain topic. So natural hazards or climate change, we kind of know a lot of these events, their intensity and frequency are exacerbated by a changing climate and how our community can become more resilient. So I really like how that's a part of this equation. It has expected annual loss, social vulnerability, but then really talking about community resilience as a factor of risk as well. So that's kind of addition what SJ was saying about assets. So like it's this larger picture of what is concerning around our vulnerability or loss, but also what is really important about how our community is resilient. And then that kind of is this whole picture. So if you were to go ahead and just click on one of these kind of red ones, it generates a report. And through that, you can kind of get some more inquiries around what is that. So you got index overview, overall, a relatively high loss, a relatively low social vulnerability, and community resilience is moderate. So those are some additional questions. So why is our loss expected to be so high? And why is our social vulnerability so low? And then you can continue to follow those inquiry arcs as you go. And then you have that quantitative number. So a score of 97.4 in comparison to the national average around coastal flooding or drought. Why is that relatively high? That's a unique idea. But then you kind of dig deeper. So that's only an agricultural based thing. So it's kind of this floodgate of sorts, but can help you kind of narrow things down or find these inquiry threads, as well as talk about some of these pieces like expected annual loss, social vulnerability and what they mean, and then really landing on community resilience, which I think is the goal of the AC in a lot of cases, is try to how can we either solve some of these problems we find or mitigate or adapt to some of these things that we find. So I like to utilize that one a lot. So this list really talks about all the things we're doing: surveys, audits, assessments, reviewing policy, especially at interviews are great. Databases, maps, of course, or guided walks, kind of what SJ was talking about, photos, and yeah, maybe riffing on them a little bit, the postcard ideas. So they don't always have to be exactly the same.
I love that though. Like we always say that, there's like collecting information about our community is that like very first thing that we do. It's like, what are the issues in our community? And that there's so many ways to do that. And that it's like can be both qualitative and quantitative. And I think just holding those things and then also asking young people how they would like, what information do they want to collect and how would they like to do that, I think is really can be really valuable as well.
We could start with Nicole's question. She was wondering, would you do the inventory before cause and effect, or could cause and effect help students brainstorm into different pathways of doing an inventory? That's a great question.
I would recommend after, I think would be the best, because once you have that list of concerns, after step one, you have that list of strengths, lists of concerns, and then you focus in on those concerns and running those through the analysis can really then help refine things a bit more, because that's kind of how the process goes. You kind of have these large scopes or these large project topics or themes or subjects or wherever you're coming from, and trying to narrow it down is really the goal before you then start up in step three. But I don't want to squash creativity. I don't know if someone likes to run it the opposite way and that works for you and your community and your students, definitely do that. But I think after getting that list of strengths and concerns, then running the root cause analysis is my recommendation.
And I think in reality, kids will come to you and they'll be like recycling, and they'll urban heat islands, and they'll come to you maybe with like this thing that is not what is that? What are you saying about it? Right? Like, what are you saying about recycling? I think as you're facilitating in step one, it's like, well, what about recycling? Like, what inventories, in this case, if a young person brings that up, let's go into cause and effect, like a little bit there. Like, what is, just breaking down, like, why did you say recycling? What are you noticing? And then, trying to brainstorm some inventories that might capture what is causing maybe a mismanagement of recycling, or just an understanding what is the issue that this young person brought up about recycling. So it kind of goes like forwards and backwards and forwards and backwards.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Field Chats. To connect with fellow practitioners and dive deeper into environmental action civics, check out our community practice and more resources at earthforce.org. See you next time.